All right, what is up, everyone? Hello and welcome back to Nick Does Algos. In this lesson, we'll be covering the Hackerrank Easy Rated Algorithm Cavity Map. In this question, we are presented with an array, and you could think of that array as a grid. And each number on the grid represents the depth of that position. So if you thought of it from an aerial view, this position is 9 deep, this is 9 deep, this one's 9 deep. Those are going to be your deepest positions in your grid. And essentially what this question says is that it wants to identify cavities. And a cavity is any hole, I guess you could say, any hole that is deeper than all of the holes around it. And not only that, but you can ignore the borders. So ignore the top row, the side columns, and the bottom row. So in this question, you're really only looking at the 9, and you're going to look at the numbers around the 9. Kind of poorly worded, in my opinion. This statement here says 2 cells are adjacent if they have a common side or edge. That makes me think that this would be the edge, or this would be the edge, or this would be the edge. And a cavity is anything that is greater than the items around it. So really all we're going to do is compare this 9 to the 8, the 1, the 1, and the 1. The number directly above it, the number directly to the left of it, the number directly to the right of it, and the number directly below it. That's what I mean by poorly worded. And if you considered edges, I would think 9 would be on the edge and 9 would be on the edge. So that's something to keep in mind. We're only going to compare those numbers. And not only that, but the number needs to be absolutely greater than it. So if this number to the right was a 9, this number would not be a cavity. But because all of the numbers around it are less than, absolutely less than the number that you're evaluating, the 9, it gets replaced with an X to indicate that it is a cavity. So let's scroll down really quick to the second example. I think it's a little bit better. Here you see that this 9 and this 9, well, you're really going to evaluate this row, or these 2 characters in this row, and these 2 characters in this row, because this is a border, this first column is a border, this last column is a border, and this last row is a border. So you can ignore all those numbers. You don't need to see if any of them are cavities. So you're just going to evaluate these 2 numbers and then these 2 numbers. And this first 9, you can look at the number above it, below it, left of it, right of it. Is it greater than all those? Of course it is. So that will be replaced with an X. And this is what I mean by ignoring edges. You're ignoring this 9 below it when evaluating it. So it is a cavity. 1 obviously has numbers all around it that are greater than it. So that will not be a cavity. 8 is pretty high, but lower than these 9s, so it won't be a cavity. And then this last 9 is higher than all the numbers around it, including this 8, and it will be a cavity. And both of those 9s are replaced by X's. Okay, so with all that being said, let's start to get to work. We're going to stick to the Hackerrank portal today. We're not going to go to Replit because Replit doesn't really like some of the stuff that we do in this question, but no worries, we can get it done. So first things first, we actually need to, we're going to need to take each of these strings and turn them into lists. And why is that? Because we know that we need to take these 9s and change them to X's, right? And well, it turns out you can't do that with a string. You can't pinpoint a position in a string and just change the number, but you can do that with a list. So if you just change these strings to lists, then you can manipulate that character much more easily, or at all. So we'll do that by doing a quick loop through our grid, and we'll do for num in range length of grid. Grid of num will equal list of grid of num. So all we've done is looped through our grid, taken each item and changed it to a list. So let's go ahead and now print our grid in the debugger and see what we're getting. Okay, there you go. Our debugger shows that all of our strings have now been changed to lists. which are much easier to work with when it comes to selecting anything and changing it. We'll change that 9, and we'll change that 9. Okay, great. So we've got a workable grid now. But what do we need to do? Well, we know that we will need to loop through our array of our rows, and then we'll need to go into our rows and evaluate each character of our rows. So we can ignore the top row, right? And we can ignore the first column, which means we're going to start at this 9, and we'll need to look at all the positions around the 9, above it, below it, right of it, and left of it, see if it is greater than those positions, and if it is, we will change that 9 to an X. So if you're familiar with loops at this point, you will probably be aware that we need an outer loop and an inner loop. Our outer loop will go to the proper row. Our outer loop will go through our array and select the proper row. And then our inner loop will select the characters within the row that we just selected. So let's get that set up. Let's do for I in range, and we'll fill out that range in a moment. And then we'll do for j in range, and we'll do that in a moment as well. And to ignore the first row, how would we do that? Well, we would start at 1 instead of 0. And then to ignore the last row, we can do length of grid minus 1. Subtracting 1 ignores the last row. And then, like I said, our j will represent our column that we're in, the column that the character is in. And again, we can ignore the first column, so we can skip over the 0 and start at 1. And we can ignore the last column by doing length of grid. And then from there, you could pick any row in the grid. So let's just pick grid 0 and subtract 1 from there. Okay. And then what are we going to do from there? We're going to satisfy some conditional statements. Let's do some comments. Let's do a bunch of comments. And first, we'll take care of the above scenario. Next, we'll do left. Next, we'll do right. All right, GHT, we know how to spell right, don't we? And then we'll do below. Okay, and as I mentioned, these are going to be if statements, and they're all going to be and statements as well. We need to meet all of these criteria if we're going to do anything. Okay, and what is it that we're actually working with? Why did we get this, all these I's and all these J's? Because we need to select a position in our grid. And we do that by doing grid I, j. So that's the value that we're going to compare to anything else, right? We're going to take our grid I and our j. I don't know why I'm not just copying and pasting, doing way more work than I need. Okay, so we've got that copied and pasted, and that represents the value that we are evaluating, right? And so if we start at I of 1 and j of 1, that means we're going to land here at this 9. First, I of 1 gets us into this row, and then j of 1 gets us into this position, this column. So if we're going to compare that value to the value above it, how can we represent the character at the position above it? So of course we'll have to do greater than, because that's what matters. If grid of ij is greater than grid of I minus 1 and j, we know that j is going to be the same because we're in the same column. We just need to move up 1 row. And how would we get to a higher row? We would do I minus 1. So let's get some more greater than set up here. And we'll just copy and paste this multiple times to get everything set up. And then, okay, we're going to look to the left of the position that we're evaluating. We know that that's the same row, so we don't need to change our I, but we need to change our j. And to look left using our j, we would do j minus 1. And then again, to the right, we're going to stay in the same row, and our j becomes the inverse of the left. We do j plus 1 to look to the right. And then this last guy, all we need to do is change our I position to I plus 1 because that will put us at the row below. Okay, so now let's get rid of these comments and get this all formatted. Like I said, this needs to be one line of code. There we go. And, oh, I deleted the end. We need that. Okay. Okay, great. So now if we get through this if conditional statement, we have met our criteria, which means we can finally do something to it, right? We can then take grid of ij and set it equal to x. And from there, let's go ahead and print our grid and check the debugger to see if we are getting what we're looking for. Awesome. No, we're not. It's not giving us any debugging. Okay, there we go. There we get our debugger. And that's not what we're looking for. Kind of weird. I couldn't tell you why, but I promise that's right. So we've got our grid set up how we want it. But it's not exactly how we want it, right? It's printing. It's not printing what we want, but it is printing. Grid at this point is an array of arrays. And we don't want to return arrays. We want to return rows of strings, right? We want it to look just like this, exactly like this. And we can do that by taking our rows of our grid, doing a join function on them to turn them to strings, and doing that for each row of our grid. So we can do that by quote.join, and we'll join a row, and that will be for row in grid. Let's go ahead and run that. It might give us our debugger. Nope, still no debugger, so let's just go ahead and return it. And hopefully this works. If not, I have done something wrong. Oh, apologies. It should be that. Let's go ahead and run that. Hopefully that works. Okay, sorry about that. Just a little syntactical error, but checks out. Let's go ahead and submit it. And there you go. We passed all of our test cases. Super sorry about that error. Hope all this makes sense. Hope it's clear to you. But if you have any questions at all, please feel free to throw them down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, if it helped you out, please go ahead and hit the like button. And we cover algorithms just about every day. So if you're at that point in your career, if you're working on algorithms right now, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. I'm sure we'll be able to help you out again at some point. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.